We bought a book for our grandson this Christmas, which seems to be another version of Where's Waldo, called Finding Nomo. A clever, beautifully illustrated book by photographer Andrew Knapp, which features Mr. Knapp's border collie, Nomo, hiding in each of his nature photographs, and your job is to find him in each of the pictures. Now, Waldo, as some of you recall, even though he was always dressed in a red and white striped shirt and a bubble hat with a walking stick, he was still hard to spot in the crowd. Nomo, the border collie, is hard to spot too in the beautiful nature scenes photographed by his owner. The point is that both of them, Waldo and Nomo, are more than just a face in the crowd or a face in nature. They are important enough to seek out and find them. You know how it is when you're trying to spot a friend in the middle of a crowd. If you're at Bramlage Coliseum or Bill Snyder Family Stadium and you're trying to find your friend in one of the sections. You know the section, but you're not quite sure where he or she is sitting, and you finally locate him or her. They're that important to you, so you want to find them amongst the crowd. Years ago, there was a scene in the movie Nativity, which I believe calls particular attention to this theme of faces in the crowd. After Joseph was ordered to return to Bethlehem for the census, he and Mary, as we know, began the 70-mile arduous trek from Nazareth to Bethlehem. As they drew near in the movie to Bethlehem, they were stopped by Roman guards to see if Joseph was the one that they were looking for. Was he the face in the crowd? Was he the father of the long-awaited Messiah, who King Herod had ordered seized if found? After searching Joseph, the guards determined that he is not that face in the crowd, and he seemed to pass him off too as very unlikely to be considered the father of a Messiah. You see, Joseph was just another ordinary face in the crowd. How true in life it is that some of the unlikeliest people go on to achieve things that you never thought they were capable of achieving. And such was the case with Joseph. You know, if you go back to your high school and college yearbooks, productivity and success later in life is not necessarily dependent on your popularity in school. The real popular students, as we know, don't always turn out to be the real successful ones later on. But some of the ones on the outside looking in all of a sudden turned out to be the most productive ones. As a candidate for the father of a Messiah, Joseph on the surface, you see, appeared to be a long shot. But his faithfulness and his loyalty compensated for his unremarkable resume. Sports Illustrated magazine for a long time has had a section called Faces in the Crowd, part of the magazine devoted to featuring standout athletes across America who you probably never heard of, but who are achieving significant things in their particular sport. In the last almost 60 years, since the beginning of the section, there have been thousands of faces in the crowd that have appeared. As an example, in 1970, former Indianapolis Colts head coach Tony Dungy appeared in Faces in the Crowd at age 14. He was a student president of his junior high school in Jackson, Michigan. He threw 23 touchdown passes over the last 3 seasons in junior high school. He was the highest scorer in basketball, and he had never been defeated in the high and low hurdles and the long jump. There was a young lady who was in Faces in the Crowd who actually, I mentioned before, won the female division of our 5K race right here at the church several years ago named Sarah Wells from Salina. She appeared in Faces in the Crowd, not because she won our race, but because she won the USA Women's National Marathon Championships in St. Louis. Faces in the Crowd. People you have probably never heard of at the time, but who distinguished themselves by their achievements, some of whom went on to acquire fame in their fields. Now consider Joseph and Mary on their way to Bethlehem, just two faces in the crowd, charged to do something beyond reasonable expectations. To go all the way to Joseph's family's hometown just to satisfy the paranoia of King Herod, who ordered them and others to go there so Herod could hunt down and seize and capture the long-awaited Messiah. Joseph's resume included the fact that he was a poor Jewish carpenter from a poor town and a poor family. He probably didn't have his own carpentry business, but was more than likely a member of a crew of carpenters working for someone else. But steadfastness seemed to be one of Joseph's greatest virtues. Mary's resume included the fact that she was a poor peasant girl who probably wasn't older than 15 or 16 years old, whose lot in life had been very difficult, who spent days working in the fields with not too much hope about climbing the economic ladder, but she was probably kind and understanding, and she didn't complain probably about her life. Two faces in a crowd that nobody probably expected would come to anything, but instead they became the parents of the Messiah promised by the prophets, and would instruct their own son in the customs and traditions of the church or of the faith, along with teaching them life's basics and fundamentals until he set out on his historic mission that would change the world. Which would lead us to another face in the crowd, Jesus himself. Imagine Jesus in that section called Faces in the Crowd, and a description of him in his earlier years. Jesus, from the town of Nazareth, born in Bethlehem, considered an early threat to Herod because of the rumor of the birth of a long-awaited Messiah. Actually had to leave the country to get out of the king's sightlines. Described as being somewhat precocious, spends time in the Jerusalem temple as a youth, debating with the elders, a good son, a good carpenter probably, and a faithful family member. He's one to keep an eye on because many people are predicting great things for him. Keep an eye on him. But it could be a while until he feels confident leaving his family and embarking on a mission, as it is rumored, unlike any mission ever before. Now the drama of this man continues. He leaves his quiet town of Nazareth. He seeks out other faces in the crowd to help him with his ministry. And all the faces that he chooses, without exception almost, have ordinary and in most cases less than impressive resumes. Fishermen, tax collectors, unknown townsfolk, some even with questionable backgrounds, questionable motives, questionable ethics. And then there are faces in the crowd he actually ministers to in his ministry. Many of them, these faces, are marginal people. They're living on the fringes of society. Lepers, a blind man, a man possessed by demons, a paralyzed man, a blind beggar, a Samaritan woman with whom nobody wants to associate, an outcast. What was the most important message Jesus gave to every single one of these people? Every single face in the crowd was important. Every single face in the crowd had meaning and value. And most importantly, Jesus loved every single one of them. And one of the most important things to remember about Christmas is that Joseph, for instance, as we just said, was an ordinary person. Mary was another average person. The shepherds were just faces in the crowd. The wise men were just faces in the crowd. You see, this is how God works. He sent his Son into the world in the most humble of all circumstances to tell us that no matter what station you are in life, no matter who you are, God elevates you to the highest position in his eyes. The psalmist in Psalm 8 tells us he has made you and me, actually little less than a God. Little less than a God. That's hardly just a face in the crowd. You know, these parables in Luke, when Jesus talks about the lost coin, talks about the lost sheep, talks about the lost son. The maid loses her one coin and she sweeps the house furiously to find that one coin because it is important to her. Or the shepherd who loses that one sheep and he searches day and night until he finds it. And after the maid finds her coin and the shepherd finds his lost sheep, they both call their friends together for a giant celebration. The coin and the sheep were that important. They were nothing but faces in the crowd. Speaking of the lost, did you ever think about the efforts and the manpower that go into saving people that, for instance, have lost their way in the mountains or are buried by a coal mine explosion or never return from a rafting trip down a river or just simply missing? Most of those people are just faces in the crowd. Very few know anything about them or have connection with them beyond their own families and friends and co-workers until they get lost. Then all of a sudden, there are teams and teams of rescue workers and helicopters and airplanes and heavy equipment and search parties and heat sensors and cell phone tracking devices, all with one goal in mind: to find these people, no matter who they are or from whence they have come. You see, most of the rescue workers don't know who they are. And it doesn't make any difference. They are more than faces in the crowd. They're human beings. They're children of God. Years ago, when I was traveling on a busy Detroit freeway, a driver of a pickup truck, several cars in front of me, lost control. Interstate 96 heading, 696 heading west side of Detroit. And the truck flipped right in the middle of the interstate. And several of us pulled over and rushed over to the truck and trying to decide what to do and what the best strategy was. And finally, we all decided that we just needed to flip the truck over and pull him out of it. You know, we didn't know him. We didn't know each other. It didn't make any difference. All we were concerned about was him and his life. He was more than just a face in the crowd. He was a child of God. You know, there may be days in your life that you feel that you are just another face in the crowd. You wake up in the morning, you go to work, go through your normal routines, do what you need to do to make things work for yourself and for your family. And maybe things just don't go well that day. Things are down for various reasons. At times you may feel that you are just Another face in the crowd, just doing your thing. Discouragement, many times, disappointment can easily settle in. Or if you leave town, you go off to a different town or city, you may feel that you are just another face in the crowd. Nobody recognizes you in another place. Nobody says anything to you on the street. People walk by you hurriedly in a hotel lobby or a restaurant. But God's message to you and me on this Christmas day is that you and I are so much more than faces in the crowd. We are as children who he continually, every day, elevates to a significant status. Evidenced by what he did on Christmas morning with people as Mary and Joseph. No matter what is going on in your life, we are still stamped high priority in God's eyes. Some of you may have heard the story of the subway child who emerges from the subway tunnel barefoot on a cold December day, several days before Christmas. A woman notices him and pulls him aside and kind of scolds him for not having any shoes or socks. She takes him to the first store she finds that are selling shoes and socks. She buys the boy a pair of shoes and socks, and before the woman knows it, he disappears. As she leaves the store, the boy is waiting for her outside the store, and when he sees her, he says, "Hey lady, are you Jesus?" Surprised by the question, she says, "No, I'm not Jesus, but I am one of his children." "Okay," said the boy, "I knew you were a relative of some kind." You know, God pulls you and me out of the crowd every day. He says, "You are special. You are elevated in my eyes." He pulled all those folks out to create the greatest miracle in the history of humanity. This is the message of Christmas.